secluded shack. The girl's brother immediately ran to inform their father, a 23-year-old man whose identity remains undisclosed. Fueled by his daughter's cries for help, the father hurried towards the source of the commotion. As he burst into that shack, a horrifying sight greeted him. Both Flores and his daughter had their underwear removed. The father pulled Flores off the girl in a blind rage and started beating him with his fists. He mercilessly struck Flores' head and neck until he knocked him out. The father immediately dialed 911, desperately pleading for help. His cries for assistance reverberated through the phone lines, his emotions spiraling out of control. In his frantic state, he had admitted to beating up the man who had violated his daughter, urging the dispatcher to hurry as the man's life hung in the balance. At one point, he exclaimed, "Come on, this guy's gonna die on me. I don't know what to do." By the time the police arrived at the scene, the attacker, Jesus Mora Flores, had already succumbed to his injuries. During the trial, the father's attorney emphasized that her client, a peaceful member of the community, had no intention of killing anyone on that fateful day. The father's actions were solely driven by the instinct to shield his child from harm. Also, witnesses reported seeing Flores forcefully carrying the girl into that secluded area within the family's ranch. That triggered the father's instincts, compelling him to save his child. Later, the Lavaca County grand jury determined that the father's actions were justified. They chose not to indict him, aligning with the conclusions of the police, who had thoroughly reviewed the evidence. The grand jury acknowledged that the father had acted within his rights to protect his daughter, allowing the use of deadly force to ensure her safety. And despite the tragedy that shook the small Texan county, its residents rallied behind the father, recognizing the depth of his love and understanding what a parent would go through to protect their family. Number 4. Jay Maynor. June 8, 2014. A man from Alabama named Jay Maynor took matters into his own hands and fatally shot his daughter's abuser. Let's get into this story a bit deeper. 2002, Raymond Earl Brooks, the adopted grandfather of Jay Maynor's daughter Julia, pleaded guilty to abusing her and only ended up serving a measly 18 months for that heinous crime. It's unimaginable. Now you might be wondering what pushed Jay to the edge and drove him to kill his daughter's attacker after a staggering 14 years. Well, it all comes down to Julia. Picture this, a girl, innocent and vulnerable, enduring unimaginable pain at the hands of her own adopted grandfather. Brooks, who had raised Julia's mother as his own until she turned 21, was supposed to be a figure of trust and love. Instead, he shattered their lives with his sickening actions. Fast forward to that fateful day in 2014. Julia, a mother of 3, was still grappling with PTSD, a condition that had taken a toll on her marriage. She was also infuriated by the fact that the man who had stolen her innocence and shattered her life had only received a minor punishment. And Jay, a father who had witnessed the devastating impact of Brooks' abuse on his daughter, could no longer bear the weight of justice failing him. In a moment of desperation and fueled by a father's love, Jay Maynor made a decision that would change everything. He grabbed his firearm and headed out into the street with one sole purpose: to eliminate Brooks. As Jay Maynor made his way towards Brooks' residence, he also fired shots at a country store located in the Berlin community. He unleashed his fury upon the Berlin Plaza Quick Stop when he spotted a man who had been romantically involved with his stepdaughter. His stepdaughter, whose name remains unknown, had ended her relationship with the man sometime before the incident. Although Jay's stepdaughter's ex-boyfriend managed to seek refuge inside the building and remained unharmed, Jay Maynor was charged with attempted murder. Julia Maynor later explained why her dad decided to shoot at her stepdaughter's ex-boyfriend, claiming that her father targeted this man due to his abusive behavior towards her stepsister. So we can't help but wonder what Julia said to her father.
Hey,
made him so furious that he was willing to eliminate 2 men he thought harmed his daughters. Jay Maynor was swiftly apprehended by the police and openly admitted to his crimes. He ultimately agreed to a plea deal that would see him spend 40 years behind bars, 20 years for attempted murder and 20 years for Brooks' murder. Julia Maynor believed the prison sentence was unjust for a man who was simply trying to protect his children. In an interview, she said, "He took a plea deal so that I didn't have to relive another station and also be able to stand in front of a bunch of people. My father was protecting me like Whether Jay Maynard's act was justified or not, I'll leave it up to you to decide. Number 3, Barry Gilton and Lupe Mercado, July 2012. Barry Gilton and his partner Lupe Mercado decided to take matters into their own hands upon learning their daughter was involved with and being abused by a pimp. So how does this story unfold? Barry Gilton grew up on...
It's more than a move. It's a new job for her. A new baseball team for him. And for Badger, it's a new yard with more room to roam. It's more than a move, and we're more than a truck.
Right now at Domino's, you can carry out any large one-topping pizza when you order online.
Guys, this smells like juicy mango, juicy grapefruit.
Central Avenue, which fell within the territory controlled by the Central Divisadero Players, one of the prominent rival gangs in that district. Although some of Barry's extended family members were associated with the CDP, he never actively engaged in their criminal activities or became a gang member himself. Eventually, Barry moved away and started a family with his partner, Lupe Mercado, raising 4 children, including their daughter, Leticia. Trouble found Leticia when she decided to move to LA. There she became involved with Calvin Sneed, a pimp. At first, Sneed deceived her by pretending to be in a romantic relationship with her. However, he soon resorted to threats and violence to keep her trapped in the world of prostitution. Barry and Lupe were devastated when they discovered the horrifying truth about what Sneed had done to their daughter. They desperately tried to convince her to return home to San Francisco, but she stubbornly refused to leave Sneed's clutches. Frustrated and fearing for their daughter's safety, Barry made a life-altering decision. He reached out to his cousin, Antonio Gilton, and his friend, Alfonso Williams, both members of CDP, seeking their help in eliminating Sneed. June 4th, 2012 wasn't a good day for Sneed while he was on his way to pick up Leticia. Out of nowhere, an SUV pulled up next to his car and the people inside were armed with at least 2 guns. Chaos ensued when they started shooting at his car, causing him to lose control of his Corolla and crash into a parked van at the top of the street. Initially, California authorities charged Barry and Lupe with the murder. However, just before their trial, the U.S. Attorney decided to indict him under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, and the Violent Crimes in Aid of Racketeering Act, also known as VICR. This unexpected twist meant that Barry and Lupe ended up spending 5 to 6 years in federal prison before their trial even began. The prosecution had to prove that Barry and Lupe had agreed to help with the criminal enterprise. The evidence didn't cut it. The prosecution's arguments were all based on guesswork, instead of solid evidence showing Barry's intentions to back up the gang. So it totally made sense for the district court to let Barry and Lupe off the hook in this racketeering case. However, they were charged and convicted of being accessory to murder. Number 2, Marianne Bachmeier. March 6, 1981. Marianne unleashed a hail of bullets in a packed courthouse in what was then West Germany. Her target? A 35-year-old criminal standing for the brutal murder of her daughter. He died after taking 6 of her bullets. Immediately, Marianne became an infamous figure. Her subsequent trial, closely followed by the German public, raised the burning question. Was her quest for vengeance justified in the face of her child's senseless murder? Fast forward 40 years, and the case still lingers in the collective memory as the most spectacular example of vigilante justice in post-war German history. But before she earned the moniker Germany's Revenge Mother, Marianne Bachmeier was an ordinary, struggling single mom, trying to make ends meet by running a pub in the 1970s. May 5th, 1980. Mary knows she would end up in the clutches of her 35-year-old neighbor, Klaus Grabowski, a local butcher with a dark past involving child molestation. As investigators later discovered, Grabowski had kept the young girl Anna at his home for several hours. before he tragically ended her life by strangling her. The extent of any other abuse she may have suffered remains unknown, but Grabowski's atrocious act was quickly discovered as his fiancée alerted the police that very evening, leading to his swift arrest. Although he confessed to the murder, he denied any abuse. Instead, Grabowski spun a bizarre and disturbing tale. According to the killer, Anna had attempted to blackmail him, seducing and threatening to accuse him of molestation if he didn't give her money. Mary Ann, Anna's mother, was outraged by this twisted story. A year later, when Grabowski stood trial for the murder, she decided to take her long-awaited revenge. During the third day of the trial, Mary Ann managed to sneak a Beretta 70 into the courtroom. She used that weapon to fatally shoot Grabowski. With precision, she aimed that gun at his back and pulled the trigger 7 times. 6 of those shots found their mark, instantly ending his life. Mary Ann then calmly lowered her gun and surrendered without any resistance, and ultimately found herself on trial for murder. During the trial, Mary Ann testified that she had dreamt of shooting Grabowski and even claimed of seeing visions of her beloved daughter in the courtroom. In her own words, she said, "I did it for you, Anna." 1983. The court ultimately convicted Mary Ann of premeditated manslaughter, sentencing her to 6 years behind bars. September 17th, 1996, Mary Ann Bachmeyer passed away at the age of 46 after a battle with cancer. She was laid to rest beside her precious daughter, Anna. And number 1, Gary Plauché. March 16th, 1984. Gary Plauché was anxiously waiting at the airport. His son Jody had been kidnapped by a man named Jeff Doucet. And on that day, Gary shot Jeff dead right in front of the cameras. Before any of this happened, Gary had led a relatively ordinary life. He had served in the U.S. Air Force for a short time and then worked as an equipment salesman. He even dabbled in camera work for a local news station. Nothing too crazy, just a regular guy trying to make a living. But then, everything changed. February 19th, 1984, something unimaginable happened to Jody Plauché, an innocent boy. His karate instructor, Jeff Doucet, offered to take him for a quick ride. Jody's mom, June, didn't think twice about it. After all, Doucet was a trusted member of their community and had been teaching karate to their kids for a while. Little did June know that Doucet had ulterior motives. Instead of a short joyride, he took Jody on a bus all the way to the West Coast. Along that way, Doucet decided to change their appearances. He shaved his beard and dyed Jody's blonde hair black, hoping to fool anyone who might be looking for him. They ended up near a cheap motel near Disneyland in Anaheim, California. But this wasn't a fun vacation. Inside the motel room, Doucet did something terrible. He assaulted Jody, his own student. Eventually, Jody mustered up the courage to ask Doucet if he could call his parents. Surprisingly, he allowed it. Jody's parents wasted no time and immediately alerted the police. They traced that call, managing to apprehend Doucet. Meanwhile, Jody was put on a flight back home to Louisiana, finally safe from his captor. Despite finding his son, Plauché couldn't shake off his unease. He spent the next few days held up in a local bar called the Cotton Club, anxiously asking anyone if they could find when Doucet would be brought back to Baton Rouge for trial. By sheer luck, a former WBRZ news colleague was there, informing Plauché that the disgraced karate instructor would be flown in at 9:08 a.m. Plauché wasted no time, heading straight to the Baton Rouge airport. Disguised with a baseball cap and sunglasses, he entered the arrivals hall, concealing his face. Making a quick call from a payphone, he noticed the WBR news crew preparing their cameras to capture the moment when Jeff would be escorted off the plane by a caravan of cops. As they passed by, Plauché swiftly retrieved a gun hidden in his boot and fired a fatal shot into Doucet's head. The WBRZ crew managed to capture the chilling moment on camera, and the footage has since gathered over 20 million views on YouTube. It shows Doucet collapsing while Barnett, a police officer, immediately tackled Plauché against the wall. During the chaos, Barnett shouted at his friend, demanding an explanation for his actions. Through tears, Plauché responded, "If someone did that to your kid, you'd do the same." While Plauché had taken the life of a child molester, the law still considered it murder. He would face trial, uncertain if he would walk free or be imprisoned. Initially charged with second-degree murder, Clocher eventually agreed to a plea bargain, pleading no contest to manslaughter. The court sentenced him to a suspended sentence of 7 years, along with 5 years of probation and 300 hours of community service, which he completed in 1989. Before he had completed both, Clocher was already back to living a relatively normal life under the radar.
Harris called keeping boys out of girls' bathrooms hateful. Colin Allred voted for boys and girls sports twice on the economy.
The Inflation Reduction Act is now law. It's going to lower costs for families. It's a really big deal.
Bidenomics is working.
And on the border.
Let me be very clear, I'm not going to vote for a wall under any circumstances.
They built that racist wall. My generation is the one that will tear it down.
Harris and Allred, two liberals, too liberal for Texas.
I'm Ted Cruz, and I approve this message.
It might seem logical to assume that only adults are capable of committing heinous crimes, but children can be equally susceptible to acts that shock and horrify. From a young murderer openly taunting a victim's family in court